see what Anna is up to.
Hello, everyone. Today is Thursday, May the 4th, and we are continuing in our reading of the Book of Longings. So, Sakina, would you like to take it away?
Sure. Let's become still for a few minutes. And as Harriet always reminds us, is take a couple of deep breaths in and out. And with each one, let go of any challenges or any work you had to do earlier today. And just let it sit by the wayside and open your hearts and your mind to listen to the story. And at the same time, be inspired and allow inspiration, allow the spirit of inspiration to come through you and share it with us. And we thank you, Creator, that we can come together and enjoy each other's company and what we have to share. And we do all of this in your name. We let it be so. And so it is.
And so it is.
And so it is.
And we're going to be starting with chapter 19. And it begins, the clearing where I'd seen Jesus praying was empty, the air spiky with shadows. I'd come early enough to perform my burial task before he appeared, stealing from the house before the sun hefted its red belly over the summit of the hills.
Who died? Wait a minute, who died?
Remember, she's burying her stuff, her scrolls.
Oh, okay.
Remember, she's
Yeah,
burying her scrolls.
yeah.
hiding,
I just
she's
when
hiding.
you just did the burial, I said, wait a minute, who died?
It's her writings.
Right.
Right,
Okay.
Remember back then, women weren't supposed to be educated enough to write or to do any of that type of thing. Okay, so we're going to go on here. Some of this. Lavi carried the bundle of my scrolls. See, there it is. The clay tablet on which I'd written my curse and a digging tool. I bore the incantation bowl beneath my coat. The thought that Jesus might return sent a shock of joy and fright through me. I couldn't say what I would do, whether I would speak to him or slip away as I'd done before. I waited at the cave opening while Lavi inspected it for bandits, snakes, and other menacing creatures. Finding none, he beckoned me inside, where it was cool and gloomy, speckled with bat droppings and pieces of stoneware, a few of which I gathered. Holding my head scarf over my nose to lessen the smell of the animal dung and molding earth, I found a spot near the back of the cave, beside a column of stone that I could easily recognize when it was time to reclaim my belongings. Lavi jabbed at the ground with the digging tool, opening a gash in the dirt. Dust flew, cobwebs floated down to make nets on my shoulders. He grunted as he worked. He was slight, unused to heavy toil, but eventually he fashioned a cavity 2 cubits deep and 2 cubits wide. Lifting up the flax that draped the incantation bowl, I gazed inside it at my prayer, at the sketch I'd made of myself, the gray smudge, the red thread, then placed the bowl into the hole. Beside it, I laid the bundle of scrolls, and last, the clay tablet. I wondered if I would see any of this ever again. I raked the dirt over them and spread the pebbles and bits of pottery I'd collected over the site to conceal that it'd been disturbed. When we emerged into the sunlight, Lavi spread his cloak on the ground, and I sat looking toward the balsam grove. I drank from the wine skin in my pouch and nibbled a piece of bread. I waited past the second hour. I waited past the third. He did not come. Excuse me a minute. On the day Mother announced my betrothal ceremony would take place in 30 days, I'd sewn 30 ivory chips onto a swath of pale blue linen. Each day since, I'd cut one off. Now alone on the roof of the house, I stared at the cloth, sobered at the meagerness of chips that remained 8. It was the twilight hour. Moroseness didn't come easily to me. Anger did. Yes, passion and stubbornness always. But sitting here, I felt bereft. I'd returned twice to Tabitha's house, but had been denied entry. Earlier today, Mother had informed me that my friend had been sent to live with relatives in the village of Joppa, south of Nazareth. I was certain I would never see her again. I was afraid I would never see Jesus again either. I saw nothing but God's backside. Had it always been so? When I was 5, visiting the temple in Jerusalem for the first time, I'd attempted to follow Father and Judas up the circular steps through the Nicanor gate, where when Mother yanked me back, her hand clasped tight on my arm as I tried to twist free, my eyes straining after my brother, who moved toward the gleaming marble and gold gilt of the sanctuary where God lived, the Holy of Holies. She shook my shoulders to get my attention. Under penalty of death, you can go no further. I stared at the smoke plumes rising from the altar beyond the gate. But why can't I go too? For years, whenever I recalled her answer, it would bestow on me the same jolt of surprise I had felt the day she uttered it. Because, Anna, you are female. This is the court of women. We can go no further. In this manner, I discovered that God had relegated my sex to the outskirts of practically everything. Taking up the snipping knife, I sliced away another ivory chip from the cloth. 7. Eventually, I told Yalta about Jesus, about the colorful threads draped over his fingers in the market stall, and how, but for them, I wouldn't know of him at all. I described the rough feel of his palm when he'd come to my aid, the sickening thud of his head on the tile when the soldier had shoved him. When I revealed how I came upon him again at the cave as he prayed the Kaddish and the exigency, I felt to speak to him, but stifled. She smiled. And now he inhabits your thoughts and inflames your heart. Yes, I did add that he caused heat and light to move about in my body as well, but I felt she knew that too. Hang on a second, this is sliding down here. There we go. I could not have borne Yalta telling me that my longing for him only came from my despair over Nathaniel. It was true that Jesus had stepped into my path at the same moment the rest of my world collapsed. I suppose he was, in part, a consolation. She must have known it, but she refrained from saying it. Instead, she told me that I had traveled to a secret sky, the one beyond this one, where the Queen of Heaven reigns. For Yahweh knew nothing of female matters of the heart. Footsteps jarred the ladder, and I turned to see Yalta's head pop up like a fishing bob. She was agile enough, but I feared one evening she would topple off into the courtyard. I hurried to offer her my hand, but instead of taking it, she said in a low voice, "Hurry, you must come down. Judas is here." Judas? She hushed me and peered into the shadows below. Earlier, one of Antipas' soldiers, the vicious one, had been positioned close by at the back entrance to the house. Your brother waits for you at the mikvah, she whispered. Take care, no one sees you. I waited for her to descend, then followed, remembering father's shouting that if Judas were caught, Antipas would execute him. A thin blue darkness filled the courtyard. I didn't see the soldier, but he could be anywhere about. I heard Shipra somewhere nearby cleaning the brazier. Overhead, the windows in the upper rooms of the house stared down, narrow and flickering. Yalta thrust a clay lamp and towel at me. May the Lord cleanse you and make you pure, she said loudly. For Shipra's benefit, then disappeared into the house. I wanted to fly across the courtyard and down the steps to my brother, but I clipped the wings in my feet and walked slowly. I sang aloud the song of purification. As I descended to the mikveh, I heard the heartbeat in the cistern. Drip, 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 drip. The air in the small underground room felt set in my throat. Lifting the lamp, I watched a skin of light form on the surface of the pool. I called in a quiet voice, Judas, I'm here. Turning, I saw him leaning against the wall behind me. The dark, handsome features, his quick smile. I set down the lamp and threw my arms about him. His woolen tunic smelled of sweat and horses. He was different, thinner, browned, a new smoldering in his eyes. Unexpectedly, my joy was overtaken by an upwell of anger. How could you leave me here to fend for myself without even saying goodbye? Little sister, you had Yalta with you. If she'd not been there, I wouldn't have left you. What I'm doing is larger than either of us. I'm doing this for God, for our people. Father said Antipas will put you to death. His soldiers are looking for you. What can I do, Anna? It's the fullness of time. The Romans have occupied our land for 77 years. Can't you see how auspicious that is? 77. That's God's holiest number, assigned to us. The time has come. Next, he would tell me he was one of the two messiahs God had promised. Judas had suffered from messianic fever since he was a boy, a condition that rose and fell according to Rome's brutalities. It afflicted almost everyone in Galilee, though I couldn't say I was much affected by it. The messiahs were prophesied. I couldn't dispute it, but did I really believe a priest messiah of Aaron and a king messiah of David would suddenly appear arm in arm and lead an army of angels that would save us from our oppressors and restore the throne to Israel? God could not be swayed to break a mere betrothal, and Judas would have me believe the Lord meant to defeat the might of Rome. There would be no dissuading my brother, though I wouldn't try. I walked to the edge of the pool, where his shadow floated on the water. I stood there staring at it. Finally, I said, much has happened since you left. They've betrothed me. I know, it's why I've come. I couldn't think how he might have learned of my betrothal or why he would bring him here. Whatever the reason, it was important enough for him to risk being caught. I came to warn you. Nathaniel ben Hania is a devil. You imperiled your life to tell me that? Do you think I don't know what a devil he is? I don't think you do. The steward who manages Nathaniel's date grove is a sympathizer to our cause. He overheard certain things. The steward spies on Nathaniel for you? Listen, I must speak quickly. There's more to your betrothal than what's written in the contract. There is one thing father doesn't have, and we know it well. He owns no land, I said. Most everyone has a private torment, some lascivious badger that gnaws at them without ceasing, and this was father's. His own father had owned sizable Pyrrhus fields in Egypt, and by law, his brother Haran, the firstborn, should have received a double portion, and he a single. But Haran, the same tormentor who had banished Yalta to the Serapute, had secured a portion for father far away, here in the court of Antipas' father, King Herod. My father was only 18 then, too young and trusting to perceive the deceit. In his absence, Haran manipulated the law to take possession of father's portion too, just as it was with Jacob and Esau. A stolen birthright was the golden badger. Judas said, Nathanael went to him, offering a quarter measure of his estates. In exchange for me? He looked down. No, little sister, marriage to you wasn't a thought in either of their minds then. Nathanael wanted a seat of power within the palace, and he was willing to give up large portions of his land for it. Already, father had promised him a place on the high council where he can leverage his power for the rich and keep his tax low. If that isn't enough, father has pledged to rent Nathanael's storehouses to hold Herod's Antipas taxes and the Romans' tributes collected throughout Galilee. This will make Nathanael the richest man in Galilee, other than Antipas. And in exchange, father gets what he craves, the title that was stolen from him, landowner. What of me? It was father who made you part of their pact. I don't doubt our mother had been nagging him to find you a worthy betrothal, and suddenly here was Nathanael. It must have seemed propitious to father. Nathanael had wealth, and because of their arrangement, he would soon possess all the clout of the governing class. Father? I am sorry, he said. There's no escape from my betrothal. The contract has been signed. The bride price is paid. It can't be ended except by divorce. And I've tried to affront him every way I could. I stopped, realizing it would never matter how repugnantly I behaved. Because of his agreement with father, Nathanael would never divorce me. I said, help me, Judas. Please do something. I cannot bear this marriage. He straightened. I will give Nathanael a reason to end the betrothal. I'll do what I can. I swear it, he said. I must go. You should leave first and be sure the soldier I saw earlier is not in sight. I will leave by the gate at the back of the lower courtyard. If the way is clear, sing the song that was on your lips when you arrived. I must appear as if I've bathed, I said. Turn your back so I can disrobe and immerse myself. Quickly, he said. Peeling away my tunic, I stepped into the coolness of the water, then dipped under, splintering his reflection into 1,000 black drops. Hurriedly, I dabbed myself half dry. God keep you, Judas, I said as I mounted the steps. I went to the house, broken-hearted and singing. Any comments so far?
No, I'm
Okay.
good.
All right, I'll go on. One morning, 3 days after Judas's visit, I woke with the image of a date palm branch. Had I dreamed of it? I sat up, pillows tumbling. The fond was a twisted contortion of deformed green-black fingers. I couldn't get it out of my thoughts. The wind began to thrash about, and I knew the rains would come soon. The ladder thumped against the roof. The cooking griddles clattered in the courtyard. It was early still when an urgent and relentless pounding began on the front door. Slipping from my room onto the balcony, I peered over the railing and saw Father hurrying across the reception hall. Mother stepped onto the loggia beside me. The heavy bolt on the door lifted. The cedar door groaned, and Father said, "Nathaniel, what's all this commotion about?" Mother reeled toward me as if I were the reason he'd come. "Go and finish grooming your hair." I ignored her. If my betrothal wished to see me, I preferred to look my worst. Tromping into the atrium, Nathaniel looked defeated. He was he was hatless, his fine clothes soot-stained and bedraggled. His eyes darted about, irate. His whole countenance was such an astonishment that Mother gasped. Father trapezed after him. Nathaniel beckoned to someone behind him, and I had the feeling of something terrible looming. I felt like a bird waiting for the stone to fly from a sing slot. A man in worker's garb stepped into view. In his hands was the branch of a date palm. It was partially torched, dropping char onto the tiles. He tossed it at my father's feet. It landed in a clatter. A shower of black cinders. The smell of smoke wafted over the room. Whatever this is, it is the workings of Judas. My date palms have been maliciously burned, Nathaniel said. Half of my grove set on fire. My olive tree survived only because I took care to put a man in the watchtower who raised the alarm in time. Father looked from the branch to Nathaniel. He said, "And you think it prudent to beat on my door and toss the evidence on my floor?" He seemed genuinely confounded by Nathaniel's anger. Nathaniel, the little man, his head didn't reach Father's jaw, but he stepped toward him, puffed up and righteous. He would tell Father now who was to blame, for I could see he knew. I pictured Judas' earnest face at the mikvah. "It was your son who set the torch," Nathaniel bellowed. "Judas and Simon ben Joris and their brigands." "It cannot be Judas," Mother cried, and the men looked up. Nathaniel, noticing me for the first time, and in that unguarded moment, even from this high distance, I saw his loathing for me. "Leave us," Father ordered, but of course we did not. We backed from the rail, listening. "Did you see him yourself? Are you certain it was Judas?" I saw him with my own eyes as he laid waste to my trees. And if there was doubt of it, he cried out, "Death to the rich and unscrupulous, death to Herod Antipas, death to Rome." Then raising his voice even higher, he shouted, "I am Judas ben Matthias." I dared to creep to the edge of the balcony. Father had turned his back to Nathaniel and was attempting to gather himself. For women, the cruelest state is to be denied. For men, it's to be stricken with shame. And Father was awash in it. I felt a prick of sorrow for him. When he turned to Nathaniel, his face was a mask. He questioned Nathaniel about every detail. "How many men did you see? What hour did they come? Were they on horseback? Which way did they retreat?" As they spoke, Father disgraced was set aside by rage. There's a reason Judas went out of his way to declare himself your son, Nathanael said. He meant to put you in disfavor with Herod Antipas. If that happens, Matthias, if you lose your power with Antipas, you will be in no position to carry out our arrangement, and there will be no reason for me to go through with it. Had Nathanael just put forth a threat to end the betrothal? Oh, Judas, how clever you are. Of course, Antipas would not tolerate father's son waging these attacks. It would drive a wedge between them, making it impossible for father to hold up his end of the bargain. Judas is no son to me, father said. He's not of my flesh, but adopted from my wife's family. From this day, he is anathema to me. He is a stranger. If I must, I will declare it before Antipas himself. I couldn't bring myself to look at mother. I will see him punished, he went on. There are rumors that Simon and his men hide in Arbel Gorge. I will dispatch soldiers to scavenge every cleft and turn over every rock. Standing beside Nathanael, the worker who brought in the branch shifted nervously. Let him be the spy, Judas. I'm sorry. Let him be the spy Judas spoke of. Let him warn my brother. Father had done a good job of pacifying Nathanael. Too good, I feared. After he departed, father withdrew to his study, and mother dragged me into her room and closed the door. Why would Judas commit this atrocious act? She cried. Why would he call out his name? Didn't he know doing so would antagonize Antipas against your father? Did he mean to punish Matthias at the risk of his own life? I said nothing, hoping she would spew her shock and alarm and be done with it. Have you spoken to Judas? Did you put him up to this? No, I said too quickly. I had an outstanding talent for committing deceit, but none for hiding it. She slapped me hard across my cheek. Matthias should never have let you leave the house. There will be no more walking the hillsides with Lavi. You will remain at home until the betrothal ceremony. If there's a ceremony, I said. And she lifted her hand and struck my other cheek. Any comments, questions about that? Okay.
It's getting interesting.
Yeah, I know it was it was interesting in that house that day. Everybody was quiet, busy. They were busy doing work all near that room.
That evening, as the day spilled the last of the pale lights over the valley, Yalta and I took once more to the roof. On my cheeks were the rouged imprints of my mother's hand. Yalta brushed her fingertip over them. She said, "Did Judas tell you he intended to burn Nathanael's grove? Did you know? He swore to do his part to end my betrothal, but I didn't think he would go so far as this." I lowered my voice. I'm glad he did. The first chill of the season had arrived. Her shoulders were hunched up like the bird wings. She drew her scarf around them. Tell me, how does destroying Nathanael's dates help your cause? When I described the bargain between father and Nathanael, she said, I see. By causing your father to lose favor with Antipas, Judas wagers Nathanael will end the argument. Yes, he's cunning. For the first time, I tasted hope on the back of my tongue. Then I swallowed and it was gone. I thought of the prayer in my bowl, of my face inside the tiny sun. I cleaved to them as things that might somehow save me, and yet doubts repeatedly consumed them. Frantic for reassurance, I told her about the vision I had of my face. Do you believe it's a sign I'll avoid this marriage and realize my hopes? I waited. The moon shone bright. The rooftop, the sky, and the houses nestled tightly across the city seemed made of glass. How can we know the ways of God? She answered. Her skepticism showed not only in the evasiveness of her words, but in the way her mouth twisted with words she didn't say. I persisted. But a vision such as this can't mean I am fated to disappear into Nathaniel's house to live out my days in misery. It must be a promise of some kind. She turned the force of her eyes on me. I watched them gather into small brown cruxes. Your vision means what you want it to mean. It will mean what you make it to mean. I stared at her, baffled, perturbed. Why would God send me a vision of it if it had no meaning other than what I give to it? What if the point of his sending it is to make you search yourself for the answer? Such uncertainty, such unpredictability. But Aunt, it was all my lips could manage. Could we know the ways of God or not? Did he possess an intention for us, his people, as our religion believed? Or was it up to us to invent meaning for ourselves? Perhaps nothing was as I'd thought. Overhead, the black magnitude, the shining, breakable world. Yet Alta had made a crack in my certainty about God and his workings. I felt it give way and a crevice open. When there were 2 ivory chips remaining on my reckoning cloth, Lavi and I slipped from the house, despite Mother's decree, and made our way to the cave where I'd buried my possessions. The sky was in a sunken mood, grayed and heavy and windstruck. Lavi had pled with me not to venture out, but knowing he put large measure in dreams and omens, I told him I dreamed a hyena dug up my belongings, and I was compelled to go to the cave and reassure myself they were still safely concealed. It was a shameless fabrication. It was true I worried about my writings and my bowl, but that was not the reason for my lie. I hoped to find Jesus. Arriving at the same hour that I'd found him praying before, I wandered about the little clearing, peering over the outcrops of rock, then searching the cave. There was no trace of him. After making a display of inspecting my burial spot, I stood with Lavi just inside the cave, studying the heavens. The sun had tunneled so far into the clouds, the world had blackened. We should go back, Lavi said. Now. He brought a small rolled canopy of thatched palm to protect us if the rains began. I watched as he unfurled it. I had an awful feeling inside, something sad and sudden, like the sky. He was right. We should leave. Once the rains began, they would not let up, perhaps for hours. I pulled my mantle over my head, then lifted my eyes toward the balsam grove, and there he was, moving through the trees. He stepped quickly, glancing upward, his tunic a smear of white in the murky light. Drops of rain began to fall. They splattered on the limestone, the treetops, the hard shell earth, sending up the smell of fertility. As he broke into a run, I stepped back into the shadows. Lavi, seeing him, tensed, setting his jaw. I said. He's of no danger to us. He's known to me. And did you have a dream of his coming too? Within seconds, the rain became a swarm of locusts, thick and deafening. Jesus bolted into the cave as if coming up out of the sea, his clothes dripping, his hair hanging on in dark, wet tendrils on his cheeks. His leather belt jangled with tools. Seeing us, he started. May I share your refuge, or would you have me seek shelter elsewhere? The hillsides belong to everyone, I answered, pulling the mantle back from my head. Even if that were not true, I wouldn't be so cruel as to send you back into this rainstorm. Recognition broke across his face. His eyes drifted to my feet. You are no longer lame. I smiled at him. No, and you, I trust, were not arrested by Herod Antipas soldiers. His smile was a broad, crooked arrangement in his face. No, I was faster than he was. Thunder cracked over our heads. Whenever the sky quaked, women uttered a blessing. Lord, preserve me from the wrath of Lilith. But I could never bring myself to say it. I would whisper instead, Lord, bless the roaring. And that was what rose now to my lips. He greeted Lavi, Shalama. Lavi muttered the greeting back, then moved some distance away to the cave wall, where he sank onto his haunches. His surliness surprised me. He was piqued that I lied about the hyena, that I'd spoken to a strange man, that I dragged him here at all. He's my servant, I said, then immediately regretted drawing attention to the difference in our stations. His name is Lavi, I added, hoping to sound less superfluous. I am Anna. I am Jesus ben Joseph, he replied, and a disturbance of some kind passed over his face. I didn't know if it was because I'd appeared arrogant or due to the oddity that we should meet again, or something in the utterance of his name. I'm glad our paths crossed, I said. I've wished to thank you for your kindness in the market. You weren't rewarded very well for it. I hope your head wasn't hurt badly. It was little more than a scratch. He smiled and rubbed his forehead. Tiny droplets sheened his brow. He dried them with his cloak, then rubbed the wool over his hair, leaving the locks askew, sprigs everywhere. He looked boyish, and I felt the same hot whirling in my breast as before. He stepped deeper into the cave, away from the mist and nearer to where I stood. You're a stonemason? I asked. He touched the owl that dangled from his belt. My father was a carpenter and a stonemason. I took up his trade. Grief flared in his face, and I guessed that speaking the name Joseph moments ago had caused the shadow to enter his eyes. It was for his father he'd prayed the Kaddish that day. Did you think me to be a yarn sorter? He asked, quick to cover his sadness with wit. You did seem adept at it. My tone was teasing, and I saw a ripple of the smile I'd observed earlier. I go with my sister Salome to the market, where there is no work of my own to be had. I've become an expert with yarn from too much practice. My brothers even more so. They're the ones who usually accompany her. We don't let her cross the valley alone. You come from Nazareth, then? Yes, I make door lintels, roof beams, and furniture, but my work doesn't rival my father's. There have been few commissions for me there since he died. I'm compelled to come to Sepphoris now to be hired as one of Herod Antipas' laborers. How was it he spoke so freely? I was female, a stranger, the daughter of a wealthy Roman sympathizer, yet he didn't hold himself apart. His eyes swept over the cave. I sometimes stop to pray here on my way. It's a lonely place, except today. He laughed, the soaring sound I'd heard in the market, and it caused me to laugh as well. Do you labor on Herod Antipas amphitheater? I asked. I cut stone for it in the quarry. When quotas are reached and hiring ceases, I travel to Capernaum and join a band of fishermen on the Sea of Galilee and sell my portion of the catch. You are many things then: a carpenter, a stonemason, a yarn sorter, and a fisherman. I'm all those, he said, but I belong to none of them. I wondered if, like me, he possessed a longing for something forbidden to him, but I didn't ask for fear of probing too far. Instead, I thought of Judas and said, "You don't mind working for Antipas?" "I mind my family's hunger more." "It falls on you to feed your sister and brothers and mother," he added. He did not say wife. He spread his damp cloak on the ground and gestured for me to sit. As I did so, I looked at Lavi, who appeared to sleep. Jesus sat down at a discreet distance, cross-legged, facing the cave opening. For a long interval, we watched the rain and the wild, untethered, untethered sky without speaking. The nearness of him, his breathing, the way everything I felt inhabited me. I found rapture in these things, in this being together in a lonely place, and all around the thundering world. He broke the silence by asking about my family. I told him my father had come from Alexandria to serve Herod Antipas as head scribe and counselor, that my mother was the daughter of a cloth merchant in Jerusalem. I confessed I would be beset with loneliness if not for my aunt. I didn't mention that my brother was a fugitive or that the disagreeable man he'd seen with me in the market was now my betrothed. I wanted to so badly to tell him my writings were buried not far from where he sat, that I was a student, an ink maker, a composer of words, a collector of forgotten stories, but I kept these things inside too. What brought you outside of the city on the day the rains begin? He wanted to know. I could not say you. The reason is you. I walk often in the hills, I told him. This morning I was impetuous, believing the rains would not arrive as soon. It was at least a partial truth. And you? Did you come here to pray? If so, I fear I've kept you from it. I don't mind. I doubt God does either. Lately, I've been poor company for him. I bring him nothing but questions and doubts. I thought of my conversation with Yalta on the roof and the doubts about God that had assailed me ever since. I don't think doubts are wrong if they are honest, I said quietly. He turned his face to mine, and his eyes felt different on me. Was it a revelation to him that a girl would that a girl would presume to instruct a devout Jewish man on the vagaries, vagaries of devotion? Had he caught a glimpse of me, Anna, the girl at the bottom of the incantation bowl? His belly groaned. He pulled a pouch from the pocket in his sleeve and removed a flatbread. He broke it into 3 even pieces and offered a portion to me and the other to Lavi, who had woken. You would break bread with a woman and a Gentile? I said. With friends, he answered, offering me his uneven grin. I allowed myself to smile back and felt something tacit pass between us, the first tiny sprout of our belonging. We ate our bread. I remember the taste of barley and peasantry in my mouth the sadness that came to me as the rain lessened. He walked to the opening and looked at the sky. The foreman at the quarry will be hiring laborers soon. I must go. May this meeting not be our last, I said. May God will it yet again. I watched him hurry away through the balsam grove. I would never tell him that our meeting in the cave that day was not by chance. I would not reveal I'd seen him there once before he prayed. To the very end, I would let him believe God's hand was in our meeting. Who's to say? Yalta's words remain with me. How can we know the ways of God? Any comment, questions, anything you want to share?
No, but she's a typical teenager who is chasing her heart.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't really have any, questions or anything, but they're pulling in some politics with Harriet, with with her dad, with the guy she's engaged to, and just how Judas planned to trick him. I mean, trick his dad, but to help his sister not be engaged to her, not be engaged to the guy. I thought that when you're seeing something created like that, I thought that was really creative.
Yeah. Yeah. I entered the palace, bedecked and perfumed, henna vines on my arms, kohl beneath my eyes, ivory bracelets on my wrists, and silver anklets at my feet. On my head, I wore a gold leaf coronet that was woven intricately into the braids of my hair. My betrothal dress was adorned with 24 ornaments, every precious stone commanded by scripture. Mother had hired the finest seamstress in Zephyr to sew the gems along the purple bands on my neck and sleeves. I was laden down and sweating like a donkey. He mounted the steps to Herod Antipas' great hall beneath a wind-ravaged canopy, held aloft by 4 servants who strained to keep it from flying away. Excuse me. My betrothal ceremony had arrived on a day full of rain and drear. I followed behind my parents, stumbling up the wide stone stairs, holding onto Yalta's arm. My aunt had seen to it that I drank a full cup of undiluted wine before setting out, which had caused the edges of things to grow furred and my distress to shrink into something small and mewling. 2 days ago, when Lavi and I had returned from the cave, Mother had met us at the gate with typical fury. Poor Lavi was sent straight to the rooftop to scour away the plenitudes of bird droppings. She restricted me again to my room, warning my aunt to keep her distance. Undeterred, Yalta came to me late in the nights with cups of wine and dates and listened to my tale of meeting Jesus. I'd found no rest since seeing him, and whenever I fell asleep, I dreamed of him coming through the rain. In the great hall, torches were mounted on the columns, and the walls were lavishly frescoed with fruits and flowers and twisting ropes. A mosaic covered a vast portion of the floor. Tiny bits of white marble, black pumice, and blue glass arranged into magnificent creatures, fishes, dolphins, whales, and sea dragons. Looking down, I saw that I stood upon a large fish swallowing a small one. I could almost feel its tail swish. I tried hard not to be odd, but it was impossible. Whined and dazed, I moved across the mosaics as if walking upon water. Only later would it occur to me that Herod Antipas, a Jew, had broken God's second commandment with a flamboyance that drew my breath. He'd made a sea of graven images. Father had once said our tetrarch was schooled in Rome and spent years gorging on this city. Now now he intimidated that world within his palace. I'm sorry, it's not intimidated. Now he imitated that world within his palace, a hidden shrine to Rome that the devout common Jew would never see. Mother appeared at my elbow. You will wait for the ceremony in the royal apartments. You must not be seen by Nathaniel until it's time. It will not be long. She made a motion with her hand, and a silver-haired woman led me along a portico, past the wing of Roman baths, then up a second flight of stairs into a bedchamber, without fresco or mosaic, but paneled with the golden wood of the terebinth tree. So you are the lamb to be sacrificed, a voice said in Greek. Turning, I saw a dark-skinned, wraith-like woman standing beside a grand bed that was swathed in jewel-colored silks. Her black hair cascaded down her back like a spill of ink. It had to be Phasaelus, Antipas' wife. All of Galilee and Persia knew that her father, Aretas, king of the Nebuchadnezzar, had conspired with Herod Antipas' father to arrange their marriage as a way to stop skirmishes along their common border. It was said that upon learning her fate, Phasaelus, only 13 at the time, cut her arms and wrists and cried for 3 days and 3 nights. The shock of her presence in the room left me momentarily mute. She was dazzling, standing there in her scarlet dress and golden mantle, but pitiful too. Her life turned into a ploy by 2 men. Are you capable of speaking Greek, or are you simply too docile to answer me? Her tone was scoffing, as if I were an object of amusement to her. Phasaelus' rebuke was a slap, and it was like waking. A feeling of loss and wrath rose in me. I wanted to shout at her. I am betrothed to someone I despise, and who despises me in return. I have little hope I will see the man I love ever again. I don't know what has become of my brother. Words are life to me, yet my writings are buried in the ground. My heart is sickled like wheat, tears, and you speak to me as if I am weak and imbecilic. I did not care if she possessed the stature of a queen. I thundered at her. I am no lamb. A flash in her eyes. No, I see you're not. You heap condensation on me, but we are no different, you and I. A sneer slid into her voice. Inform me, please. How are we no different? You were forced to marry, as I am now forced. We're not each of us used by our fathers for their own selfish purposes. We are both wares to be traded. She walked toward me, and her scent floated out. Nard and cinnamon. Her hair swayed, her hips oscillated. I thought of the lurid dance my mother had seen her perform. How I would have loved to see it. I feared she was coming to slap me for my insolence, but I saw her eyes had softened. She said, "When I last saw my father 17 years ago, he wept bitterly and begged forgiveness for sending me to this wasteland. He told me it was for a noble reason, but I spit on the floor before him. I cannot forget he loved his kingdom more than me. He married me to a jackal. I saw the difference then. Her father had traded her for peace. My father had traded me for greed." She smiled, and I saw this time there was no guile in it. "We shall be friends," she said, taking my hand, "not because of our fathers or our shared misfortune. We shall be friends because you are no lamb and I am no lamb." Facilius leaned her head on to my ear. "When your betrothal repeats the blessings, do not look at him. Do not look at your father. Look to yourself." Any comments?
It seems as though she has made a new friend.
Uh-huh. And you're just going to see it gets interesting with this friend. We stood in the torch dark light atop the watery mosaic. My parents, Yalta, Herod Antipas, Thesalius, Rabbi Sherman, Sheman, Ben Yohe, Nathaniel, and his sister Zophar, and at least 24 other extravagantly coiffed people I could not name and did not care to. I planted my toes upon the scaly back of a fierce-eyed sea dragon. I'd never seen Antipas up close. He seemed the age of my father, but heavier, with the belly that protruded. His hair was oiled and fell about his ears from beneath a strange crown that resembled an upside-down gold-plated stew pot. He wore bracelets and silver circlets in his ears, and his eyes were too small for his face, as small as date pits. I thought him repulsive. The old rabbi recited the Torah. "It is not good for man to be alone," and then spoke the rabbinic teachings. A man without a wife is not a man. A man without a wife establishes no household. A man without a wife has no progeny. A man without a wife, household, and children does not live as God ordained. Man's duty is to marry. His voice was perfunctory and tired. I did not look at him. My father read the betrothal contract, which was followed by a token payment of the bride price, passed ceremoniously from Nathaniel's hand to his. I did not look at them. "Do you attest to your daughter's virginity?" the rabbi asked. My head jerked up. Would they now make the pink brown folds between my legs less bruisiness or less busyness? Nathaniel leered, a reminder of the miseries that lay in store for me in the bedchamber. Father anointed the rabbi with oil as a sign of my purity. All of this I watched. I wanted them to witness the contempt shining on my face. I cannot record how Nathaniel looked as he read the groom's blessings, for I refused to offer him even a glance. I stared at the mosaic, imagining myself far away beneath the sea. I am no lamb. I am no lamb. In the banqueting hall, Herod Antipas reclined on a luxurious couch, propped on his left elbow. He sat behind the center table of the triclinium, while everyone waited to see who would be seated to his right and left, and who would be escorted to the sad little couches at the far end of the tables. The only true and precise measure of the Tetrarch's favor was how near to him one was seated. We women, failiest among us, were gathered at a separate table altogether, farther away than the hapless and wretched persons who would soon find themselves assigned to the distant seats. Here we would be served the less fine dishes and the poorer wines, just as they would. Father typically received the seat of honor at Herod's right. He boasted of it, often, though not as much as Mother, who seemed to think Father's power and glory extended to her. I glanced at Father standing with Nathaniel, full of pompous expectation. How would he be so confident? How could he be so confident? His son had joined Antipas' enemies and committed public acts of treason. The entire city knew of his actions. I could not believe they would go completely unnoticed by the Tetrarch. Surely not. The sins of the son were visited on the father, just as the father's sins were visited on the son. Hadn't Antipas once ordered his soldier to cut off the hand of a man whose son was a thief? Did father truly think there would be no repercussion for him? It had perplexed me that Judas's rebellion had thus far yielded no apparent consequence to father. It occurred to me now, however, that the Tetrarch would strike at father unexpectedly in a moment when he could inflict the most humiliation. Mother's face was strained with worry, and I could see she had the same thoughts as I. We watched the men being escorted to their places, one by one, until only 4 places remained. The 2 seats of gloat beside Antipas and the 2 seats of shame at the end. Left waiting were father and Nathaniel and 2 men unknown to me. Shiny diadems of sweat had formed on the brows of the 2 strangers. Father, however, showed no sign of concern. With a nod to his palace steward, Chusa, Antipas had father and Nathaniel escorted, to the seats of honor. Nathaniel clasped father's arm, a gesture that seemed to celebrate the alliance the 2 of them had made. Father's power was intact. Their treaty was safe. I turned to Yalta and saw her frown. The women dipped their bread and ate. They prattled and tossed back their heads and laughed, but I had no stomach for food or gaiety. 3 musicians played the flute, cymbal, and Roman lyre, and a barefoot dancer, no older than I, leapt about with her brown breasts protruding like mushroom tops. Visit a pestilence upon my betrothal, let it be broken by whatever means God chooses. Unbind me from Nathaniel ben Hananiah. The curse I'd made, written, formed my lips of its own and repeated inside me. I no longer had faith God would hear it. Antipas lifted himself from the couch with some labor. The music ceased. The voices hushed. I saw father smile to himself. Chusa struck a little brass bell, and the Tetrarch spoke. Let it be known that my counselor and chief scribe, Matthias, has not rested in his search for my enemies. Today he delivered to me 2 zealots, the most vicious of rebels, who have waged transgressions against my government and the government of Rome. He looked toward the doorway, raising his arm in dramatic fashion, pointing, and every guest turned in unison. There, bare-chested, his skin a bewilderment of whipped marks and blood crust, stood Judas. His hands were bound, and he was cinched about his waist with a rope that was tied to that of a wild-eyed man I guessed to be Simon ben Joris. I leapt to my feet, and my brother turned and found me. Little sister, he mouthed. He also caught my arm as I bolted toward him, forcing me back onto the stool. There's nothing you can do but draw trouble on your own self, she whispered. Behold the traitors of Herod Antipas, called Chusa, and a soldier led them stumbling into the room. It seemed they would be made into a sport for our entertainment. They were dragged a full circuit about the banquet hall to the sound of my mother's crying. The men spewed abuses on them as they passed. I stared at my hands in my lap. The bell was rung again. The parade halted, and Antipas read from a scroll that I imagined my father had penned. On this day, the 19th of Marchuan, I, Herod Antipas, Tetrarch of Galilee and Prasia, decree that Simon ben Joris will be executed by sword for treacherous acts, and that Judas ben Matthias will be imprisoned at the fortress of Manchuras in Persia for the same offense, his life spared as a dispensation to his father Matthias. It passed through my mind that my father had not acted as monstrously as I thought, that he delivered Judas into the hands of Antipas in order to save him from certain death. But I knew that was more wishful than true. Mother was slumped onto the table like a discarded cloak, her hair braid falling into a bowl of honeyed almonds. Just before Judas was led away, I looked at him, wondering if it would be my last glimpse. Any comments?
No,
Were you going to say something, Harriet?
no, I
Okay.
just said, no, I just answered you no.
Oh, okay.
No, okay.
A fever sickness descended on Zephyrus. It came like an unseen smoke blown down from heaven to afflict the unrighteousness. God had always chastised his people with plagues, fevers, leprosy, paralysis, and boils. So people said, but how could this be when the sickness bypassed Father and took hold of Yalta? Lavi and I bathed her face with cool water, anointed her arms with oil, and sponged her lips with balm of Gilead. One night, when delirium took hold of her, she sat up in bed and clasped me to her saying the name Chaya. Chaya. It's me, Anna, I told her. But she smoothed her palm along my cheek and spoke the name again, Chaya. The name means life, and I thought maybe in her feverish state, she was calling out for her life not to leave her. Or perhaps she'd simply mistaken me for someone else. I dismissed the incident, but I didn't forget it. The entire city was closed up tight as a fist. Father did not venture to the palace. Mother withdrew to her quarters. Shipra went around with a garland of hyssop around her neck, and Lavi kept a talisman of lion's hair in a pouch at his waist. Day and night, I climbed onto the roof in quest of stars and rain and birdsong. There, I witnessed the dead carried along the street to be laid in cave tombs beyond the city, where they would remain sealed until their flesh rotted and their bones were gathered into ossuaries. Keep out of God's sight, Mother cautioned me, as if in getting a glimpse of me on the roof. God would be reminded of my wrongdoings and strike me down with sickness too. Part of me wished for it. My guilt and sorrow over Judas was so grave. I wondered if my going to the roof wasn't really an attempt to contract the fever, and die in order to escape my distress. The day after my disastrous betrothal ceremony, Judas left for the palace fortress in Machaerus. Father announced his departure at the evening meal, then forbade Judas' name to be spoken again in his house. The war between my parents inhabited the house like a silent, prowling creature. Whenever father left the room, my mother would walk to the threshold and spit on the place his foot had last fallen. She believed the fever would be God's retribution upon Antipas and father. She waited for the Lord to smite them dead. She waited to no avail. Then, one afternoon, a messenger arrived. We were seated on the couches in the reception hall, taking our midday meal, nothing more than dried fish and bread, since mother forbade Shipra and Lavi to venture out to the market. Nor would she allow the messenger into the house, ordering Lavi to receive his message at the door. When he returned, he cast a look at me. I couldn't quite read. Well, what is it? Mother said. It is news from the house of Nathaniel ben Hananiah. He has fallen victim to the fever. My heart fluttered strangely. Then came an upwelling of relief and hope and gladness. I stared into my lap, afraid my feelings would blossom into my face. Glancing sideways at mother, I watched her plunge her elbows into the tripod table and drop her head into her hands. Father's face looked pale and grim. With a colluding glance at Yalta, I rose from my couch and climbed the stairs to my room, closing the door behind me. I would have danced except for the guilt I felt over my happiness. When the same messenger arrived 2 weeks later with news that Nathaniel had survived, I wept into my pillow. Ever since the conversation with my aunt that had provoked my doubts, my old understanding of God had begun to fray. Now questions rolled inside me. Had God intervened to spare Nathaniel, ensuring my marriage to him? Or was his recovery merely a matter of luck and resilience? Had God caused my aunt's fever in order to chastise her, as my mother said? And when she too was restored, did it mean she repented? And Judas, had God willed him to be imprisoned by Herod Antipas? Why had he failed to save Tabitha? I could no longer believe in the God of punishments and rescues. When I was 9, I discovered God's secret name. I am who I am. I thought it was the truest, most wondrous name I ever heard. When my father overheard me speak it out loud, he shook my shoulders and forbade me to say the name ever again, for it was too holy to be uttered. I did not stop thinking of it, though. And during those days when I questioned God's nature, I repeated the name over and over. I am who I am. Vesalius summoned me to the palace on the 4th of Tebet, unaware it was the 15th anniversary of my birth. A soldier had arrived at our gate, well before noon, bearing her message, written in Greek, on a sheet of ivory hammered so thin it was like a peel of milk. Never seen a miss. I'd never seen a missive written on ivory. I took it in my hands. Light quivered on the black script, every word taut and perfect, and my old longing was ripped open. Oh, to write again, and on such a tablet. 4th of Tibet. Anna, I hope you have survived the fever and the confinement of these long and woeful weeks. I bid your presence at the palace. If you deem it safe, leave your cage this day and come to mine. We shall take the Roman baths and resume our friendship. Basilius. A shiver ran through me. Leave your cage? It had been a month and a half since the sickness had first appeared in the city. Only yesterday we'd heard of a child who'd become newly infected, but the disease seemed to be taking its leave. The funerary processions had, the funerary processions had nearly ceased. The market had reopened. Father had resumed his business, and Yalta, though still delicate, had left her bed. It was Friday, Sabbath would begin that evening. Nevertheless, Mother, her eyes full of jealousy, gave me permission to visit the palace. The mosaic of sea creatures on the floor in the great hall. Oh, I know what I want to do. Any comments or questions, concerns? When I first read this, it reminded me of how COVID caused people to have to stay away from each other, stay in, and were confined.
I
Yeah,
thought about the same thing.
yeah, and it seemed like it seemed like, it seemed like she was wishing that her fiance I know she didn't want him not to survive, but she wanted him not to survive, and I thought that was kind of
Yeah.
cute.
I think she was praying for him to die, really.
Well, I think there was a feeling that I felt she was praying for him to die, and she could then say, well, it was natural causes and God, God took over, and
Right.
and yet she, she was torn, because she really did not want to wish harm on anybody. But by the same token, she felt that she was going to be imprisoned in a sense in this marriage, so to speak, and she wanted out of it. And she was
Exactly.
willing to have anything happen that would have her out of it. But you're going to find out more.
Okay.
Okay. The mosaic of sea creatures on the floor in the great hall was even more glorious in daylight. Facilius's silver-haired attendant, Joanna, left me staring at it while she went to seek her mistress. I had the feeling once again of standing on fishes, of waves moving beneath my feet, of the world reeling towards something I couldn't see. My husband's enthrallment with Roman mosaics has no beginning and no end, Delia said. I'd not seen her enter. I smoothed the folds of my pale yellow tunic and touched the amber bead at my neck, struck as I'd been before by the sight of her. She wore a brilliant blue robe and a string of pearls across her forehead. Her toenails were painted with camphor. Camphor, I think that's how it's pronounced. And I apologize, ladies, because some of these words I am having difficulty saying.
That's okay. No problem.
It's beautiful, I said, letting my eyes sweep once more across the seafloor. Soon we will not have a tile left that hasn't been turned into an animal, a bird, or a fish. Does it concern the patriarch that he's violating the Jewish law against graven images? I don't know what made me ask such a thing. Maybe it came from my own brush with fear when I'd drawn the image of myself inside my incantation bowl. Whatever prompted it, my question was ill thought. She released a high chirruping laugh. It would concern him only if he were caught. Though a Jew himself, he cares little for Jewish customs. It is Rome he lusts for. And you have no fears for him? Should a host of zealots drag my husband through the streets for breaking this law, it would not arouse the slightest care in me as long as they left the mosaics undamaged. I too find them beautiful. I would miss them more than I would miss Antipas. Her eyes snapped brightly. I tried to read her face beneath her easy indifference, and her light-hearted dismissal of her husband lay something blistering. She said, even as the fever scourged the city and his subjects were dying, he commissioned a new mosaic. It will be even more flagrant than the rest of them. The artisan himself is afraid to create it. I could think of only one reason for such trepidation. It will depict a human form. She smiled. A face, yes, a woman's face. We descended the steps onto the portico, then another set to the baths. A frail cloud of dampness floated up to us, the smell of wet stone and perfumed oils. Have you taken the Roman baths before? Thalius asked. I shook my head. I take them weekly. It's an elaborate and time-consuming ritual. They say the Romans indulge in them daily. If that's the case, one wonders when they found time to conquer the earth. In the changing room, we stripped naked except for towels, and I followed Facilius to the triptycharium, where the air flickered with lamps in high niches. We dipped in a pool of tepid water, then lay on stone-topped tables, while two female attendants thrashed our arms and legs with olive branches and rubbed oil into our backs, kneading us like balls of dough. This odd ministration caused me to leave my body and sit on a little ledge just above my head, free of fret and fear. In the next room, however, I came hurtling back into myself. The hot vapors of the caldarium were so profuse, I struggled to breathe. We had entered the torments of Gehenna. I sat on the hard, slick floor, ripping my towel and rocking to and fro to keep myself from fleeing. Thalius, meanwhile, walked placidly through the mist, unclothed, her hair fallen around her knees, her breasts full as muskmelons. My own body, though 15, was still thin and boyish, my breasts like two brown figs. My, my forehead throbbed and my belly pinched. I don't know how long I waited, though, through that small, enduring, only that it made what came next a paradise. The most spacious of the bathing rooms, the frigidarium, had carved bright walls with wide arches and bays bordered with vine-painted columns. Entering, I threw off my towel and plunged into the cold pool, then reclined on the bench that wrapped about the walls, sipping water and eating pomegranate seeds. It's here that Antipas intends to place his new mosaic, Thalius said. She pointed to the tiles on the center of the room, in the center of the room. Here, in the frigidarium, it's a room hidden from prying eyes, and it's his favorite room in the palace. When he entertains Annius, the Roman prefect, they spend all of their time in here conducting business, among other things. The suggestive tone of her last sentence was somehow lost on me. I don't see why he wishes to install a woman's face here. Wouldn't fishes be more fitting? She smiled. Oh, Anna, you are still young and naive about the ways of men. They conduct their business here, it's true, but they also give way to other interests. Why do they wish a woman's face here? Because they are men. I thought of Tabitha. I wasn't as naive about men as Phallius thought. A scraping around sound came from the alcove behind us, the click of bracelets, then a low, guttering laugh. So you've been spying on us, Phallius called out. She looked past me, over my shoulder, and I spun around, grabbing for my towel. Herod Antipas stepped from behind the arch. He fastened his gaze on me, his eyes moving from my face to my bare shoulders, then along the edges of the towel that barely covered my thighs. I swallowed, trying to force down my fear and disgust. Basilius made no attempt to cover herself. She addressed me. He sometimes watches me bathe. I should have warned you. Lascivious old men. Had he observed me step naked and dripping from the pool? Recognition flickered on his face. You're the daughter of Matthias, the one we betrothed to Nathaniel ben Hania. I didn't recognize you without your clothes. He stepped toward me. Look at this face, he said to Basilius, as if I were a sculpted object to be examined and discussed. Leave her be, she said. It's perfect, large with spaced eyes, large, well-spaced eyes, the high plump cheeks. Look at her mouth. I've never seen a more beautiful one. Coming closer, he slid his thumb along my lower lip. I glared at him. May you become crippled, blind, deaf, mute, and impotent. His finger wound to my cheek, down to my neck. If I fled, what then? Would he send his soldiers after me? Would he do worse than rub his thumb across my face? I sat unmoving. I would endure this, and then he would leave. He said, You will sit for my artisan so he can sketch your face. Draping herself, Cecilia said, You want her face for your mosaic? Yes, he said. It's young and pure. It suits me. I sought his rodent eyes. I will not allow my face to be in your mosaic. You will not allow? I'm your tetrarch. One day I will be called king, as my father was. I can force you if I wish. Basilius stepped between us. If you force her, you'll offend her father and her betrothed. But that's what for you to decide. You are the tetrarch. I saw she was practiced at managing his comprises. He pressed his fingers together, seeming to consider what she'd said. In that brief interim, I wondered if I was to become visible in the world, not through my writings, but through pieces of broken glass and marble. Could the vision I'd had of my face inside the tiny sun refer to a mosaic in Antipas' palace? As I gripped the edge of the bench, an idea came to me. I didn't stop to consider how it might turn into something unforeseen, even dangerous. I took a measured breath. You may have my face for your mosaic, but on one condition. You must release my brother Judas. He let loose a laugh that bounded off the walls. I glimpsed Facilius tuck her chin and grin. You think I should release a criminal who plots against me only for the pleasure of seeing your face on the floor of my baths? I smiled. Yes, I do. My brother will be grateful and cease his rebellions. My parents will bless you, and the people themselves will call you blessed. It was those last words that snared him. He was a man despised by his people. He craved to be named King of the Jews, a title that had belonged to his father, who ruled Galilee, Persia, and all of Judea. Antipas had been bitterly disappointed when his father carved up his kingdom into 3 portions for his sons and gave him a lesser part. Failing to get his father's blessing, he spent his days seeking the approval of Rome and the adoration of his people. He found neither. Facilius said, "She could be right, Antipas. Think of it. You could say that your clemency is a gesture of mercy for your people. It could turn their hearts. They will heap praise upon you. From my mother, I learned the skills of deception. I secreted my womanhood, hidden my incantation bowl, buried my writings, and feigned reasons to meet Jesus in the cave. But it was Father who'd shown me how to strike a despicable bargain. Antipas was nodding. Setting him free would be a magnanimous act on my part. It would be unexpected, a shock perhaps, and that would draw even more attention to it. He turned to me. I'll make the proclamation on the first day of the week, and the next day you will commence to sit for my artisan. I will sit for him when I've seen Judas with my own eyes, and only then. Any comments?
For 15 years old, she's a smart cookie.
She's shrewd, yes.
Yeah, I think it was well, I guess when whoever you are, if you brought up in a house of politics or finance, or you just kind of pick up stuff. But just to let you know, it is 8:32.
I was just going to say that, and we can stop here, which would be chapter 27.
Okay.
So that's a good place to stop, I think.
Yeah. Okay, that sounds good. Well, I'm enjoying this book.
Good.
I'm enjoying the story. I think that we're learning a lot about that time period,
Mhm.
and I'm believing that it's really interesting. How things still are kind of the same now. People are still getting
Mhm.
married for political reasons. We
Mhm.
say we're getting married for love, but a lot of times it is for money. It is for politics. It is for, strengthening, family, and or social bonds. It's not always necessarily for love.
Yeah. I
So,
think
so anybody else's thoughts or ideas about this story?
No, I think you summed it up pretty well. Um, it's it just amazes me how some things change and some things don't, and some of those changes take a long, long time. Because I mean, even in today's society where women do have more rights than the women of honest time, there are still some parts of the world where those practices are still in vogue or still the custom.
Mhm. I agree. And also, to me, and I've said it before, it shows the courage that this young girl demonstrated during this time period, and how she was very, very watchful and mindful of what was happening, and uh, did certain things. Like she noticed how her mother was deceitful. She noticed how Facilius worked with managing her husband. Um, and so she took both of those instances and struck up a bargain with Antipas.
Mhm.
And today, there are still women who have to, for whatever reason, manipulate, do certain things in order to get certain things done, whether it be in the business world or in the home, and that. But no matter what we do, to break away takes courage.
Yes, it
And,
does.
there are some of us that we've been, we were raised certain ways, and yet, and studied and that type of thing. But yet it still took us courage to break away from some of the things that we were raised with,
Mhm.
whether it be religion or business type ventures or a husband, whatever. And when we step out on courage, knowing that, something inside of us, which, I call the energy, God, whatever you want to give that term to, that presence within you, fortifies you and helps you to be more courageous and to do it.
Mhm.
And that, so it's important in raising our children that we raise them with a sense of knowledge that there is something great inside you. And if you step out in courage, that great being inside you is going to help you get through it. And I think that's what she demonstrates in this book.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Very good. Well, that's it for our session today. You say we're stopped on chapter 27.
Right.
Okay. So when we come back next week, we'll follow up from
Pick up
there. Yeah, it's really super cool. I'm enjoying this. I'm enjoying this book.
I'm glad you are, because and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but you seemed a little skeptical when we were first starting, because of it being a novel. At
No,
least that's
not because it's a novel. I love novels. I have always read novels. I don't particularly care too much for fictional characters that
okay.
a fictionalized account of a historical
Real.
character. Yeah, that's I'll watch it. I mean, I'll listen to it. I'll read it, but it's still not my cup of tea. I would never have picked up the book myself to read it.
Well, this isn't even my book. I was doing a healing session on one of my clients, and we've gotten talking, and she says, I just got a book, and she says, I'm in the middle of another book and I'm not ready to read this yet, but she says, I think it's a book you would enjoy. And she handed it to me, and I didn't, I'd read the title and the author, but I didn't open it and I didn't turn it over. It was just the way it felt in my hands, and my hands started to vibrate. And it got really kind of hot. And I said to her, I guess I'm supposed to take this book and read it. So I read it. And as I had told you, 3 days I read this whole book, because I couldn't put it down. It was like, what's the next part going to be? I wasn't real familiar with some things in the Jewish culture, but I was familiar with how women were treated in the Middle East. And that was depicted in here. And I had read some other books in which they did say that Jesus was married, because Jewish men had to marry at a certain time period, and that. So anyway, that's why. But I'm enjoying reading it a second time. Although some of the words, when I was reading it silently, I had no problem naturally pronouncing the words, but reading it out loud, some of the words I'm having some difficulty with. So.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, let's see. Tomorrow we don't have anything going on. Saturday we are continuing in our study of the angels, and I think we're going to do angels from different cultures, and I think we're going to be talking about demons also, the fallen angels. So I think that's what we're going to be talking about on Saturday. Sunday is the our tarot expo. It would be fun if we can do something like this, make it a yearly basis. I probably will do it, more in the more maybe in the summertime than in May. We just kind of chose it. We just we just kind of thought about doing having our tarot session with what's her name, George Tramiel.
Right.
Yeah, and but I think that this would be a fun thing to do on a yearly basis. So might be something we might think about later on. But from Saturday, it's going to be Sunday. I'm sorry, Sunday, May the 7th. No, goodness
Yes.
gracious.
Yeah, Sunday's the 7th.
Okay, Sunday is the 7th. Okay, great. How you gonna say, oh, wait a minute, is that the wrong date? No,
Nope.
so Sunday, May the 7th from I'm saying like from 2 to 5. That just gives us a little bit of time to, eat some food or, just take our time without having to, be bottled up in one
Yeah.
session. So
Yeah.
so please come on out if you can. And
I
that's
think you
and that's it
definitely
for
try.
today.
Okay. Well, thank each of you.
But then, Harriet,
Thank
would you like
you.
to close us out in prayer?
I can.
Thank you.
Let us sit tall, taking a full, deep, cleansing breath. And as we let go all of the negativity that might be infusing our bodies at this time. And let us give thanks, be grateful for this time that we've spent together studying this work of fiction and to try and understand and see the difficulties that this young woman has gone through. And perhaps it will give us a better understanding of how and why we as women in today's society may take lessons from her troubles, from her adventures, and try and see ourselves in her place and think about what we would do if we were in her position. How would we handle it? It will give us a greater insight into who we are as people. And let us be grateful for Inner Haven, for giving us the opportunity to come together as a family and discuss these things and discuss the things that we have experienced in our own lives and take lessons from the things that we study, including this book of longing, and use the lessons that are being given us by the things that we study so that we can become better citizens of our society, making this world a better place. And so it is.
And so
And
it is.
so it is. Thank you, Harriet. That was beautiful. All right, darlings. I'll see you all on Saturday.
Okay,
Okay, love you.
Bye now.
Bye.
bye
Well
all.
blessed.